1. In August 1956, age 9. My name is Andrea. It means manhood or courage. In Europe, only boys are named it, but I live in America. Everyone says I seem sad, but I'm not sad. I was born down the street from Walt Whitman's house on Mickle Street in Camden in 1946. Broken brick houses, cardboard porches, garbage spread over cement like fertilizer on stone fields. Dark. A dark so thick you could run your fingers through it like icing and lick it off your fingers. I wasn't raped until I was almost 10, which is pretty good, it seems, when I ask around, because many have been touched but are afraid to say. I wasn't really raped, I guess, just touched a lot by a strange dark-haired man who I thought was a space alien because I couldn't tell how many hands he had. And people from Earth only have 2. And I didn't know the word rape, which is just some awful word, so it didn't hurt me because nothing happened. You get asked if anything happened, and you say, well, yes. He put his hand here, and he put his arm around my shoulder, and he scared me, and he followed me, and he whispered something to me. And then someone says, but did anything happen? And you say, well, yes. He sat down next to me, and it was in this movie theater, and I didn't mean to do anything wrong, and there wasn't anyone else around, and it was dark, and he put his arm around me, and he started talking to me, saying weird things in a weird voice, and then he put his hand in my legs, and he just kept saying, let me. And someone says, did anything happen? And you say, well, yes. He scared me, and he followed me, and he put his hand or hands there, and you don't know how many hands he had, not really, and you don't want to tell them that you don't know, because then they will think you are crazy or stupid, or maybe there are creatures from Mars and they have more than 2 hands, but you know this is stupid to say, and so you don't know how to say what happened. And if you don't know how many hands he had, you don't know anything. And no one needs to believe you about anything because you were stupid or crazy. And you don't know how to say what happened. And you say, he kept saying, just let me. And I tried to get away, and he followed me, and he followed me. And then they say, thank God nothing happened. So you try to make them understand that, yes, something did happen, honest, you aren't lying, and you say it again, strained, thick-lipped from biting your lips, your chest swollen from heartbreak, your eyes swollen from tears, all salt and bitter, holding your legs funny, but you don't want them to see, and you keep pretending to be normal, and you want to act adult, and you can barely breathe from crying, and you say, yes, something did happen, and you try to say things right, because adults are so strange, and so stupid, and you don't know the right words, but you also try so hard. And you say exactly how the man sat down next to you and put his arm around you and he started talking to you. And you told him to go away, but he kept talking to you in a funny whisper, and he put his hands in your legs, and he had a really deep voice, and he whispered in your ear in this funny deep voice, and he kept just saying, just let him, but you couldn't understand what he said because maybe he was mumbling or maybe he couldn't talk English, and so you can't tell them what he said, and you say maybe he was a foreigner because you don't know what he said, and he talked funny, and you tried to get away, but he followed you, and then you ran, and you didn't scream or cry until you found your mama because he might hear you and find you. And so you were quiet, even though you were shaking, and you ran, and they say, thank God nothing happened. And you don't know why they think you were lying, because you were trying to tell them everything that happened just the right way. And if you were a stubborn child, a strong-willed child, you say the almost 10-year-old version of, fuck you, something happened, alright? The fuck put his hands in my legs, all over my legs, me, my legs, my legs. His arm was around my shoulder, and his mouth was on my neck, and his hand was under my shirt, and his hand was in my pants, and he kept saying, just let me. And it was a creepy whisper in some funny language, and he was saying sounds I don't understand. And they say the child is hysterical. Something must have happened. The child is hysterical, and they want to know if anything came inside or was outside, and you don't want to tell them that he took your hand and put it somewhere. And they say, thank God nothing happened, and they ask if something went inside, but then you ask inside where, and they look away, and you were nearly 10, but you were a fully desperate human being, because you want to know inside where, and so you will know what happened, because you don't know what he did, or what it was, or how many hands he had, but they don't ask you that. And your mother says, show me, and you don't know if you should put your arm around her shoulder, or rub your head into her neck and she says, show me, and you try to whisper the way that he whispered in a deep voice, but you were too far away from her for it to be like him, and you don't know what he said, so you're crying and a little sick, and you point to your legs and say, here, and she says, show me where he touched you, and you say, here, and you point to your legs, and she says, did he put anything in, and you say, his hands, and she says, anything else? Did he put anything else in you? And you don't know how many hands he had or if he put them in or in where, and you were wearing Bermuda shorts because it is hot. Hot summer, August, black ones. Too grown up for a girl your age, she told you. But you were always fighting to wear black because you want to be grown up, and you're always fighting with her anyway. And this time she let you because she didn't want to fight anymore. And she wants to know if he touched your knee, and she points to your bare knee, and you say yes. And she wants to know if you touched higher, and you don't know how high because you were sitting down, and you say my legs. And she asks you if you touched your Bermuda shorts, and you say yes. And she asks you if you took them off, and you think she's trying to trick you because you were at the movies, and how could someone take your Bermuda shorts off at the movies? And she asked you if he touched you under the Bermuda shorts, and she wants to know what he touched you with, and it was dark and you couldn't see, and you don't know what he touched you with or how many hands he had, but she doesn't ask you that. And afterwards, sometimes you think he was from outer space because people from Earth have 2 hands. And when you make a drawing of him with crayons or pastels, you draw a stick man with a big face and big hands, lots of hands. And sometimes you make another hand in the sky coming down. And you never tell that you were drawing him, and you say that he rubbed you with something inside your legs. No, not there, higher up, and she cries. Your beautiful mother cries, with her long hair, with her black hair down to her shoulders, and her cotton summer dress with flowers on it from when she was young. She cries. And she sits across from you, and she holds your hands in hers, and you feel so sorry because you always do something wrong and make her angry or sad. And this was a special day when she let you go to the movies by yourself for the first time because you said you were mature enough. And she let you wear black, and you made her cry. So you say, I'm sorry, Mama, nothing happened. Nothing happened. He didn't hurt me, Mama. I'm fine, Mama, honest, Mama, nothing happened. It didn't, Mama, honest, nothing. And she says, pregnant something, and I'm punished in my room, put alone in my room, and not allowed to come out, and she doesn't like me anymore. And I cry. I'm going to cry until I get old. I'm going to cry for God to see. I'm afraid that the man will come again because he came from nowhere the first time, and he disappeared into thin air, and if he is from outer space, he can go anywhere, or maybe he followed me like they do on television, and I couldn't see him because he hid behind trees and cars, and God would know if he had followed me, and maybe God would stop him from finding my room. Or it could be like when someone is killed on television and you think he is dead, and then it gets all quiet and he isn't dead, and he attacks again with a knife or a gun, or he's real strong and it's real quiet, but suddenly he appears from nowhere. So I cry, but I keep my eye on the door so I will be alert in case he's just pretending to be gone, but really he sneaked inside the house and he's just waiting. Or he could come in the window, and something hurts me like when you fall down and scrape your knees and the skin is all scraped off and it's all bloody and has cuts in it and dirt in it, and your mother cleans it off and puts iodine on it and says it won't hurt but it burns, and she puts a bandage on it. Something hurts somewhere, but I don't look because I'm afraid, and I keep my hands away because I don't want my hands to touch me, and I don't want to touch anywhere in my legs because I'm afraid. And I couldn't say something was hurting because I didn't know if something was hurting or not, or where it was, because maybe I was making it up because it hurt like a scraped knee. But it hurt somewhere that didn't exist. I wanted God to see me crying so he would know, and it would count. I asked God if there were men from outer space on Earth because he knew if there was life on other planets, but he didn't answer me. And I knew there weren't. But I knew he could have made them if he wanted to. And I knew people only had 2 hands. And I didn't know how many hands this man had, and I couldn't figure it out, no matter how much I tried. And if he was from outer space, he could come into my room now through the air or any time from nowhere. I wanted God to tell me the truth, because I was afraid. I was trying to tell God I was hurt because I thought God should know and let me stay in my room and keep the man away, and I wanted to stay in my room a long time, until I got old. And I wanted God to keep my mother away because she didn't like me anymore, and I didn't want to take off my Bermuda shorts or show her anymore, and I didn't want her to look at me anymore, and I thought God should know. I needed him. And where was he? I thought maybe the man wasn't a bad man because they said nothing happened after all, and I looked so grown up, so how could he know I was just a child? And I wasn't sure if he thought I was a child or not, because I did look very grown up and act very grown up, but I told him I was a child and he should go away. But I said it in a very grown up way. I cried because they said nothing happened, and because I didn't know if the man knew I was a child, and I cried because I wanted God to know something had happened. And I was a child, and I wanted God to say why it was less bad if I wasn't a child, because I was still the same me if I was or wasn't. And for the first time, I didn't want to grow up, because all the adults said it was less bad. I cried because I didn't see how it could be less bad. And if I grew up, were men going to be putting themselves on me in movies, only it wouldn't be bad because I wouldn't be a child anymore? I cried because God was busy somewhere and didn't come. And if I cried, he would know I was hurting so much somewhere that didn't exist, and he could find it, because he lived somewhere that didn't exist. And he would know what I meant, even if I couldn't say it. And I wouldn't have to point here and here and here, and so I kept crying in case he didn't know yet that he should be coming to me now, even though people were sick and hungry all over, and he had to see to them too. I used to talk to God, especially when my mother was sick and in the hospital, and my dad had to be working so hard all day and all night, and God would be pretty near to me, in the same room near me. And I wanted to know things like why anyone had to die or be poor or starve in China, and if China was real or just a story adults made up, and why colored people were treated so bad, and why so many Jews were dead. And I can't remember what he said, but I always thought someday I would understand if I kept trying to pin him down. And maybe I could convince him not to have things be so bad. And I had complicated discussions with him about why he made things the way he did, because I didn't think he did it right. And I wanted to be a scholar when I grew up and write things about what God meant and intended. And he would listen to my questions and arguments, but the adults wouldn't. And I heard him inside my head, and it was like he was in the room, but it was never scary, and it always made me peaceful, even though I thought he hadn't done some things completely right. And I would get calmed down and quiet, even when I had been begging him to let my mother get better, or at least not die. I talked to him a lot when my mother was in the hospital for an operation that might kill her, and they told me she might die right then. And I had a high fever and appendicitis and a rash, and the adults told me I had to tell her over the phone that I was all right because she must not worry and die. And I knew it was wrong to lie, especially because she might die right then, or that night, or the next day. And my last words to her would be lies. And I wanted to cry to her, but the adults said I wasn't allowed, and it didn't matter if God said it was wrong to lie, if adults said you had to lie, because you had to do what adults said and not what God said. You had to be careful not to tell anyone you talked with God, because they might think you were crazy, and you had to make sure nobody heard you talking to him, and you had to remember not to tell the doctor. They told you to believe in him, and you were supposed to pray, and they sent you to Hebrew school, and you had to go to the children's services where girls weren't allowed to do anything anyway, but he wasn't supposed to talk to you. He talked to Moses and Abraham, but you were just Andrea from Camden, even though Abraham had just been a boy herding sheep when he figured out there was one God. He had been staring up in the sky trying to think about God, and he thought God was the moon, but the moon disappeared when night was over, and he thought God was the sun, but the sun disappeared when the day was over, and then he figured out God had to be there all the time, so God couldn't be the sun or moon or any king because they died, or any idol because you could break it. And you weren't so different from Abraham before he grew up, except that you didn't understand how he knew God couldn't be the air, because air is everywhere all the time, and the teacher didn't know. But they never say they don't know, they just make you feel stupid for asking something. You were supposed to pray, but you couldn't lead the prayers because you were a girl, and you couldn't read from the Torah, so a whole bunch of boys who were a lot stupider than you got to do all the important things, and you weren't supposed to argue with God, even though the rabbis did it all the time. But you were a girl, and you weren't allowed to be a rabbi anyway, and all the rabbis who argued with him were dead anyway, and none of the rabbis you ever saw or heard who were alive ever argued with God at all. You thought they just didn't care enough. But they kept telling you rules about what you had to do and what you couldn't do and how to grow up and what to think about, what to think, but you knew that the dead rabbis couldn't have been like them. and hadn't just learned the rules, so sometimes you could write arguments in the margins of books just like the great rabbis, because you wanted to make commentaries like they did, but you weren't supposed to write in any holy book, even if it was for children. So you would have to hide your writings, and you would have to try to argue with God out loud in person, but hiding it. But mostly, you would talk with God when you were crying for your mother, or had a big fight with her, or if you were very scared. I had a big fight with God when I learned in Hebrew school that women couldn't go to the temple when they had their periods, because I got mine when I was 9. I was an adult when I went into the movies alone in the Bible. And it had hurt so terrible, so bad, and it still did every month. And I couldn't think why I couldn't think when anyone would need God more. And how could he keep me away and say awful things like that I was unclean when he gave you the thing? We were studying Leviticus, and I was in class, and I was angry with the teacher who sat slumped over the book and told me what God had said, which I could see for myself. No one else was upset, but maybe they hadn't gotten their periods yet, and the teacher never would, and he could go into the temple all the time, the whole month, all slumped over and stupid. When I had it out with God, I tried to explain over and over that I was really sincere, and and why he would want to keep someone sincere like me out of the temple. And there wasn't any good answer that I could figure out, except that it wasn't sincerity God was looking for. He wanted people who didn't bleed. So why had he made you bleed? And you thought that having a baby would be even worse and hurt even more, and he said you were even more unclean and had to stay out even longer, but you could solve that by not having a baby. And if you had a baby, you would have 9 months when you could go into the temple and make God happy. But when it got real bad and you needed him, you couldn't go, because once it got really bad and blood came, you were unclean. I thought women should have their babies in the temple where God was, because it might hurt less. The teacher said you had to be accepting things you didn't understand, and God didn't have to be fair. But if God wasn't, who would be? And how would they know how? The teacher said that when he went to dinner in people's houses, he would take a book off of the people's bookcases and blow dust off it to show the wife the books weren't clean and how lazy and dirty she was. He said the books were always dusty because women were lazy and didn't take care of their husbands' books. I didn't understand why it wasn't rude to blow dust off someone's books and make them feel bad, and couldn't understand how she could stand it after she had made him dinner and been real nice. But he just laughed and said women were unclean, and he had just proved it. I asked him if his books were dusty, and he said his wife cleaned them, and he blew on them. I didn't go to God with the problem of the books and the dust. But I didn't think it was fair either. I asked my mother, and she said he was my teacher and I should listen to him, but I decided not to anymore. Now I had another problem on my mind. Why was what the man did less bad if I wasn't a child? If I was a grown-up and went to the movies and wanted to see the movie, why would it be less bad if the man stopped me, and if he scared me, and if I had to run away, and if he hurt me, and if he made me cry, and if I didn't want him sitting next to me and whispering or anything? I wanted to know if God thought it was less bad. And I hated the adults for saying it was less bad. I wanted to know where God was when the man was there, and why God didn't make the man go away. I wanted to know if God was there too. The Hebrew school teacher said God knows everything and can do anything. He's always there, everywhere. I believed he could do anything and knew everything. But I didn't think he was always there, because too many bad things happened. And if he was there, they couldn't just happen. How could they? If I see someone do something bad, I'm not supposed to just watch. Mama says call the police or an adult. How could he be in the movies with me when the man came? He wouldn't even come to my room after because he knew all about it and felt ashamed for making such a horrible man. I knew he could do anything and make us all, so why did he make that man? Was God there like the teachers kept saying and the rabbis kept saying, and did he look, or was he looking somewhere else? Because he could have turned to look to somewhere else, because it didn't take so long. And time for God must be different, and it must have just been a small minute for him to turn away. Or if he had to go to India or somewhere, maybe he wasn't there. I sort of thought he was there, but I couldn't believe that he'd just sit and watch, because that wouldn't be right. And God has to do things that are right. Maybe he turned away, but maybe he was there. Maybe he looked. I thought he was there. I didn't feel alone. But I couldn't stand to think that he had just looked, so I stopped thinking it. But the only way I could stop thinking it was to think that probably God didn't exist anyway, and it was only a superstition, and there was no God, the same way there were no space creatures. I lectured myself that I was a child, and I was going to grow up even though I didn't want to anymore, and someday I would understand why it was less bad if I wasn't a child, unless the adults were just lying. Because adults lie a lot to children, I had found out. Maybe they were lying about God too. Maybe there wasn't one. I sort of thought God had been there, though. The theater was empty, but it didn't feel empty. And there's a special kind of dark that feels like God's in it. It's got dots of light in it, all dancing and sparkling, or it's almost thick. So it's just all surrounding you like a nest or something. It's something alive. And you're something alive, and it's all around you. Real friendly, real close and kind, as if it will take care of you. I was so excited to be at the movies by myself. I thought it was a very great day in my life, because usually I would be fighting with my mother, and she wouldn't let me do anything I wanted to do. I had to play with children, and she didn't like for them to be older than me, but all my real friends were older than me, but I kept them a secret. I had to go shopping with her and try on clothes and go with her to see the women's things and the girls' things, and there were millions of them, and they were all the same. All matching sets with the dressy ones all messed up with plastic flowers, all fussy and stupid, and they were so boring. All skirts and dresses and stupid things, little hats, little white gloves, and I could only try on things that she liked, and I wanted to read anyway. I liked to walk around all over and go places I'd never seen before, and I would always try to find a way to wander around and not have to shop with her. Except I loved being near her, but not shopping. So now she was going on a big trip to Lists, the big department store in Camden, and almost near Philadelphia, right near the bridge, and I loved to be near the bridge. And I used to love to have lunch with my mother at the lunch counter at the giant store, because that wasn't like being a child anymore. And we would talk like girlfriends, even holding hands. So this time, I asked if I could go to the movies across the street while she shopped, and come back to Liz all by myself and meet her when the movie was over, instead of fighting with me to make me do what she wanted, and she said yes. And I couldn't believe it, because it made me so happy, because she didn't fight with me, and she had faith in me. And I knew I could do it, and not get lost, and handle the money right, and get back to the store on time, and be in the right place, because I was mature. I had to act like a child, but I wasn't one, really. She wanted to have a child, but I had been on my own a long time. So I had to keep acting like a child, but I hated it. When she was sick, I was on my own, and when I was with relatives, I was alone, because they didn't know anything. And when she was in the hospital or home from the hospital, I did the ironing and I peeled the potatoes, and once she couldn't breathe and fell on the kitchen floor and it was late at night and my dad was working, I called the doctor and he told me to get her whiskey right away, but I didn't know what whiskey was or how to find some. So he told me to go to the neighbors, and I did, and I got her whiskey and I ran like he told me in the dark at night, and I took care of her and made her drink it even though she was on the floor dead, and the doctor said if not for how calm I was, she would have died, but I wasn't calm. And I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I thought she was dead, and I stopped breathing. I had already lived in lots of different houses, and you can't act like some normal child even though everyone wants you to be just normal. And they don't want you to feel bad, but you have to be grown up and not give them trouble, and they never know what it is in your heart or what you really think about, because their children are normal to them, and you aren't their children. And their children don't know about dying or being alone. So you have to pretend. So I was grown up inside and acted all grown up all the time, except when my mother was around, because she wanted to have a child, a real child, and got angry if I didn't act like a child, because it upset her to think that I had grown up without her when she wasn't there, because she wanted to be the mother of a real child. When I forgot to be a child or didn't want to be, I made her very mad at me and very unhappy. And she thought I was trying to hurt her on purpose, but I wasn't. I just loved being near her, sitting near her when she drank her coffee. And I was so proud once when when I helped my dad shovel snow and she let me drink some coffee just like her. I loved her hair. I loved when she talked to me about things. Not telling me what to do, but just said things to me about things. Not treating me like a baby. I loved when she let me go somewhere with her and her girlfriends. I loved even when she was sick, but not real sick, and was in bed for many days or sometimes many weeks, and I was allowed to go in and visit her a little and sit on the bed and watch television with her. And we would watch the $64,000 question. And we were both crazy for Charles Van Doren because he was so cute and so intellectual. And we rooted for him and bit our lips waiting for him to answer and held hands and held our breath. Then I had to leave her alone because I had tired her out. But I felt wonderful for hours after. So warm and happy because my mother loved me. We held hands and we sat. But I couldn't stand the stuff she made me do. She made me sew and knit and do stupid things. I was supposed to count the stitches and sit still and be quiet and keep my legs closed, and when I sat down and wear white gloves and a hat when I went out in a dress. She made me close my legs all the time, and I kept trying to get her to tell me why I couldn't sit how I wanted, but she said girls must not ever sit so sloppy and bad, and she got so mad because I said I liked to have my legs open when I sat down, and I always did what I wanted, even if I got punished. She said I was a relentless child. But if I had to think about closing my legs all the time, I just couldn't sit and talk, and I thought it was just silly and stupid, and I wasn't going to do it, and she slapped me and told me how I was just trying to hurt her. Sometimes she screamed and made me sit with my legs closed, counting stitches, knitting, and I wanted her to die. I wanted to go everywhere, and I would lie and say I was somewhere I was allowed to be, and I would go somewhere I had never been, just to see it, or just to be alone, or just to see what it was like, or if anything would happen. Once I got caught because two boys who were bigger and older threw a Christmas tree at me and hit the top of my head, and blood started running down all over me. I was walking on a trashy dirt road, but it had trees and bushes on it, and even some poison sumac on the trees, which was bright red, and I thought it was beautiful. And I used to pretend it was nature, and I was walking in nature. But children were supposed to go there alone, because it was out of the way. The two boys came running out of the bushes and trees and threw a whole Christmas tree at my head, and my head got cut open and blood started running down, and I got home walking with the blood coming down, and I got put in bed, and the doctor came, and it wasn't anything. Only a little cut with a lot of blood, he said. He said the head could bleed a lot without really being hurt bad. But I had been someplace I wasn't supposed to go, so it was my fault anyway, even if I had been hurt very bad. I was supposed to learn that you weren't supposed to go to strange places, but instead I learned that my head didn't get smashed or cracked open, and I wasn't going to die, and I could do what I wanted if I wasn't afraid of dying. And I wasn't. I had another life, all apart from what my mama said and wanted and thought and did, and I did what I wanted. She couldn't stop me, and I liked going places she wasn't, and I liked not having to listen to her or stay with her or be like some prisoner where she could see me, and I liked doing what I wanted even if it was nothing, really. I hated her telling me everything not to do, or all the and I stopped listening to her, and no one knows all the things I did, or all the places I went. I liked it when she was away. I knew it was bad of me to like it because she was sick, but I liked being alone. I got sick of being her child. I'd get angry with her and yell at her for trying to make me do things, but I was always nice to the other adults because you wanted them to like you, because then they left you alone more. And sometimes they would talk to you about things if you asked them lots of intelligent questions and made them talk to you. And you have to be nice to adults to show you have manners, and so they won't watch you all the time. And because you get punished if you aren't nice to them, because adults get to punish you if they want, and you can't stop them. I knew I had to be nice to the man in the movies, because he was an adult, and I had to talk to adults in a certain way because I was a child and I got punished if I didn't, but I also wanted to act like an adult, so they would leave me alone. So I had to talk to him like an adult and not cry or be stupid or act silly or act like a baby or be rude or raise my voice or run away or be scared like a baby. You had to say Mr. or Sir, and you had to be polite, And if you wanted to be grown up, you had to talk quiet and be reasonable and say quiet, intelligent things in a certain quiet, reasonable way. Children cried. You didn't cry. Little babies screamed like ninnies. You didn't scream. Adults didn't scream when someone talked to them quietly. The man talked very quiet. The man was very polite. I was too grown up to scream and cry. And then I would have had to leave the movie if I made noise, because you weren't even allowed to make any noise in a movie. You weren't allowed to whisper. I couldn't understand how come the man kept talking once the movie started, because I knew you weren't allowed to talk during it. My dad hated for me to cry. He'd walk away in disgust. My mom yelled at me, but my dad went away. Adults said I was a good child, or I was very mature for my age, or I had poise. Sometimes they said I was a nice girl, or a sweet child, or a smart, sweet child with such nice manners. It was a big act on my part. I waited for them to go away, so I could go somewhere and do what I wanted. But I wanted them to like me. My mama made me talk with respect to all adults, no matter what they did. Sometimes a teacher was so stupid, but my mama said I had to talk with respect or be quiet, and I wasn't allowed to contradict them or even argue with them at all. One teacher in regular school made her pet stand behind her while she was sitting at her desk in the front of the room, and you had to brush off her collar. Just stand there behind her for 15 minutes or a half hour or longer, and keep brushing her collar on her shoulders with your open hands, palms down, stroking the whole way from her neck to her arms. She sat at her desk while we would be taking a test or writing something or answering her questions, and she would say someone had to come up and stand behind her, and she wore one of those fuzzy collars you put on top of sweaters, and someone had to stand behind her chair facing the class and with their hands keep brushing the fuzzy collar down, smoothing it down with one stroke from her neck to her shoulder, the left hand to stroke to the left side of the collar and the right hand to stroke the right side of her collar, and it had to be smooth and in rhythm and feel good to her, or she would get mean and say sarcastic things about you to the class. You just had to stand there and keep touching her, and they'd stare at you. You were supposed to like it because she only picked you if she liked you, or if you were done with your test early, or if you were very good, or everyone else stared at you, and you were the teacher's pet. But my arms got tired, and I hated standing there, and I felt funny, and I thought it was boring, and I didn't see why I couldn't do something else like read while I was waiting for the test to be over, and I tried to prolong it, but I couldn't too much. And I thought she was mean. But the meaner she was, the more you wanted her to like you and be nice to you, because otherwise she would hurt you so much by saying awful things about you to the class. And my mother said she was the teacher and an adult, and I had to be respectful and do what she said. I had to be nice to adults and do what they said because they were adults, and I wanted to grow up so I wouldn't have to listen to them anymore and obey them. But the only way to get them to think you were grown up was to obey them, because then they would say you were mature and acting like an adult. You had to brush the teacher's collar, and no one ever had to say why to you, even if you kept asking. And they just told you to keep quiet and stop asking. She could make you stand in the corner or sit alone or keep you after school or give you a bad mark, even if you knew everything. I wanted to be an adult like my dad. He was always very polite and intelligent, and he listened to people and treated them fair, and he didn't yell, and he explained things if you asked why, except sometimes when he got tired or fed up, but he was nicer than anyone. He didn't treat people bad, even children. He always wanted to know what you were thinking. He listened to what everybody said, even if they were children, or even if they were stupid adults, and he said you could always listen, even if you didn't agree, and even if someone was dumb or rude or filled with prejudice or mean, then you could disagree in the right way, and not be low like them. He said you should be polite to everyone, no matter who they were, or where they came from, or if they were colored, or if they were smart or stupid. It didn't make any difference. My relatives and teachers were pretty stupid a lot, and they weren't nice to Negroes, but I was supposed to be quiet even then, because they were adults. I was supposed to know that they were wrong without saying anything, because that would be rude. I got confused, because he said you need to be polite to Negroes because white people weren't, and white people were wrong, and Jews like us knew more about it than anyone, and it was meaner for us to do it than anyone. But I also had to be polite to white people who did bad things, and used bad words, and said ugly things that were poisonous and made 6 million die. My dad said I had to be quiet because I was a child. My dad said I had to be polite to my uncle, who called, and when I was growing up, I could say something. I watched my dad, and he was quiet and polite, and he would wait and listen, and he would try to tell my uncle he was wrong, and Negroes were just like us, especially like us, and they weren't being treated fair at all. But I don't think it helped. I didn't think it helped or was really good enough because my uncle never stopped. And I wanted to explode. All the time. My dad always said something, but it was just at the end because my uncle would go away and not listen to him, and no one listened to him except me. I'm pretty sure of that. And once when my mother was sick and going into the hospital, and I had to stay in my uncle's house, I cried so hard because I was afraid she would die. But I also knew he would be calling colored people bad names, and I would have to be quiet, and I had to live there and couldn't go away. And my dad told me, especially as an order, that I had to be quiet and respectful even though my uncle was doing something awful. I didn't understand why adults were allowed to do so many things wrong, and why children had to keep quiet all the time during them. I stayed away out of the house as long as I could every day. I hung out with teenagers or I just hang out alone, and I prayed to God that my uncle wouldn't talk, but nothing stopped him. And I would try not to move and not to breathe, so I wouldn't run away or call him bad names or scream because it caused me such outrage in my heart. I hated him so much for being so stupid and so cruel. I sometimes had cuts on the inside of my mouth because I would bite down to stop from talking back, and I would press my fingernails into my palms so bad they would bleed, and I had sores all over my hands, so I bit my nails to keep the sores from coming. You had to do what adults said no matter what, even if you didn't know them, or they were creeps, or very bad people. The man was an adult. He wasn't so mean as my uncle in how he talked. He talked nicer and quieter. I was sitting there, acting grown up, wearing my black Bermuda shorts. Outside it was hot, and inside it was cold from air conditioning. I liked the cold inside. Our house was hot, and the city was hot, but the movie was nice and cold, and the sweat dried on you, and I liked how amazing it felt. The man sat down next to me. There were a million empty seats in the theater. It was like a huge, dark castle, but he sat down right next to me, on my left. The whole big theater was empty. The usher was a teenager, but I don't think he was cute. He had a light blue uniform and flashlight. He showed me to my seat. He wanted it in the middle, but I kept wanting to get closer to the screen. I sat down in front where I'm not allowed with my parents because they think it's too close. But I like it, because then the movie is big, and it seems like the people are giants, and you forget everything looking at them. The theater was so big, and the ceiling was so high, and you could get lost in it, except the seats were all in rows. The theater was dark, but not completely dark. There was dim light, but not enough light, really, to see in or read a book in. I had a book stuffed in my pocket. I always carried a book. I liked to read whenever I could. You could read almost anywhere. But there wasn't enough light to go down. Oh, wait. But there wasn't enough light even for me, so I had to sit and wait for the lights to go down all the way and the movie to start. I crossed my legs because I thought it was sophisticated. I crossed them one way, then the other way. I opened the top buttons on my blouse because I was alone now, and I could do what I wanted. The man sat down and the usher wasn't there because I tried to look, but I didn't want to insult the man by acting like anything was wrong. I didn't understand why he had to sit there, and I wished he wouldn't, but you had to be nice to people who sat down next to you on a bus or in a synagogue or anywhere, and I wanted to move, but he hadn't done anything bad, and I knew it would be an insult to him, and I didn't think I was better than other people. He said some things to me, and I tried to look straight ahead, and I tried to be polite and not talk to him at the same time, and I tried to ask him to leave me alone, but not to be rude, because he was an adult, and it wasn't right to be mean anyway. I didn't understand what was wrong, because people sit next to people all the time, but I thought he could move over one seat and not be right next to me. But I didn't know how to say he should move over without it seeming like I was mean, or thought he was dirty or poor or something bad. He said things, and I said yes or no, or I don't know, or I don't think so, and kept looking ahead to show I wasn't interested in talking, and had other things on my mind. And he told me I was pretty and grown up, and I said I was just a child, really, and I'd never been to the movies before myself, and my mother was waiting for me. And I wanted to watch the movie, but when someone says you're pretty, you have to say thank you. When the lights went off, it was really dark, and the room was dark and big, an enormous cave of darkness, and I felt buried alive in it, as if it wasn't good. And then the light started flickering across things from the screen, and the man put his arm around my shoulder, and I asked him not to touch me. But I was very polite, because he thought I was just being a friendly person, because people only touched you, or because I thought he was just being a friendly person, because people only touched you if they were your friends, or your relatives, and liked you. And I wanted to scream for the usher to come, but I was afraid of making noise, because it wasn't right to make noise, and I didn't want to do something wrong and insult the man. And he did all those things, many things, but as if it was just one thing, with no breaks or stops in it, because he just curled and curved and slid all over with his arms everywhere and his mouth all over and his hands everywhere and keeping me in the seat without stopping, and he kept whispering, and he hurt me. And I didn't know what to do, except that grown-ups don't cry or make noise. And I didn't know what to do, except he was hurting me. And he slumped more over me in my chest, and he kept pressing me, and then he slumped again and shaked and stopped pressing so hard, and I pulled myself away from him, grabbing on me, and I ran all the way up the aisle in the dark, and I found the usher, who was all the way in the back, and I said the man was bothering me, but I was afraid to say what he did. And the usher didn't say anything or do anything, so I asked if I could sit somewhere else, please, and could he keep the man from bothering me, please, because I knew you weren't supposed to talk in the movies. And the usher could make you stop. And he just stared at me. And he took me somewhere else with his flashlight, and I sat there making my shirt right and my pants right, but I couldn't make them right, and wiping my hands dry, and I sat there looking all around in the dark, and there wasn't enough light from the movie for me to see where the man was, and I couldn't look at the movie because I kept looking for the man. But I was afraid that if he saw me looking for him, he would think that I was wanting him to come, and I kept trying to see where he was in the dark and if he was going to try to talk to me more. And the movie kept going on, but I was afraid to watch it because maybe the man would come. And I knew I couldn't find my mother because it wasn't time to meet her yet, and I had to stay in the movies, or I didn't have anywhere to go. And then the man came, and I was going to scream or hit him or shout, but I was afraid to because I was never allowed to hit adults. No such thing could ever happen. And he looked at me, and he stared, and he walked by and down the aisle, and I was afraid he would come back, and I got up and I ran out. I ran out into the streets, into the cars, into the hot air, into the light. It was like running out into a wall of heat. And I couldn't breathe. And I ran to the department store, and once, when I was a little child, I had gotten lost in the department store, and was lost from my mother a long time. And someone took me to the manager because I was crying and lost and scared, so they announced over the loudspeaker for my mother to come and find me, and she came. And this was the first time I was ever so scared since then. But I wouldn't cry or make noise because I didn't want the man to find me. So I kept running and saying, I need the manager, I need my mother, and it was an emergency, but I kept as quiet as I could, and I couldn't breathe, so they called her on the loudspeaker. And then when she came, I shook and I cried, and I tried to tell her, and she said, did anything happen? And I kept saying yes, and I kept trying to say each thing that happened. And then we were on the bus, and I kept crying, but I wasn't supposed to talk because people could hear, and it was something bad. And then we got home. And I said how I didn't want the man to sit next to me, and I didn't know how to tell him to go away because he was an adult, and I didn't mean to do something wrong. But I didn't know how to tell the man because I didn't even know what it was or if it was a mistake, because maybe he was making a mistake because it was dark, and maybe he thought I was someone else, or he didn't, or that he knew, or it was some other mistake. And when I told him, he didn't listen to me. I wanted him to go away. I tried to be polite and act like an adult and not make noise in public, and I didn't cry like a child, and he had a dark jacket on, and they asked me if it was leather, but I didn't know what leather was, and they asked me what it felt like, but I didn't know how to say. And he had on a striped shirt, and he had on dark pants, and he had dark hair, and he didn't sit straight even when he first sat down, and he had bad posture because he couldn't sit straight, and he smoked, and he asked me if I wanted to smoke, and I did. But I didn't say that to my mother, because I just looked ahead of me and said no, even though I wanted to, and so I was good. And I didn't have to say I wanted to. And then he slumped all over me, and he held me still with his arm around my shoulder and his head pinned under my head, so I couldn't move away, and I couldn't describe him enough for them, but I could still see him. And my mother cried. And now I can see him, almost. I can't remember yesterday as well, even though he's right next to me, almost, on me, almost. The pressure of his body covering my heart, almost. I can touch him, nearly. I could search the earth for him and find him, I think. Or if he sat down next to me, I would die. Except I can't quite see his face. Nearly, but not enough. Not quite. And I could feel his fingers, almost. If I touch my face, his fingers are more real. And my dad came into the room after I couldn't cry anymore, and he said nothing happened, and not to cry anymore, and we wouldn't talk about it anymore. And I waited to be pregnant and tried to think if I would die. I could have the baby standing up and I wouldn't make any noise.